everybody back to the Foster-Adoptive-Kinship Care parenting discussion. Today it's with me, Sky Kirshner, and with Dina Shelton. Dina, how's your day going?
It's going pretty good. I was up a while last night. We have a new puppy, which inviting any new member into the household turns everything on its head, right? So we're in the middle of that again. But otherwise,
we're already talking about the stuff, aren't we? We can't even
exactly
say how
right.
it's going without getting into a topic.
How are you?
I'm pretty good, thanks. Yeah, empty nest here, so all is good. We bring us your puppies. I wanted to follow up with you about expectations, and I know each time you've talked about how that can trip the parents up when they're thinking it's going to be one thing, and usually the expectations are way down up here, and the reality somehow it's usually not the other way. It's nice when it's the other way, right? When the reality is much better than the expectations. But let's just get started off on that again, because that just seems so important.
Well, I love that you are bringing that back up too and kind of in full circle, because I think that expectations and reasonable expectations in this area of life for these families, those of us who are adoptive and foster parents, expectations are a lot more complicated even than in regular life. We talked a little bit about last time, I kind of threw it in there about, expectations in terms of relationships and how unrealistic expectations are oftentimes the things that damage in marriages. The expectation things are going to be a certain way or feel a certain way or go a certain way. But there's a conflict with that with foster and adopt parents, because expectations intermingles with hope and with our ability to believe that things can be better than what they are. And sometimes those two get intermingled or conflicted even between the two, and they're separate things. Hope and expectations are very different. And so, but we can replace hope with expectations, but what we find on the other side of that is a lot of frustration because things aren't happening the way that they are. So I always encourage parents to have reasonable expectations. But in any training, any foster and adoptive training, they say that you have to understand where these children are coming from, what they've been through, and have reasonable expectations for what it's going to be like. I think the biggest piece that's missing is that most of the expectations that we're really going to battle, and as foster and adoptive parents, are not the ones that we go over in training. They're ones that are unspoken and that come up as a result of the others. So we work really hard to have reasonable expectations based on what we've learned, but then we still keep hitting roadblocks and bumps. And those oftentimes are the result of expectations that we just really haven't unearthed yet.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm wondering if it's also, the intellectually I understand, don't have expectations, but then my heart has a different logic all its own, right? And so that the heart is going to have these expectations, and you can tell me 100 times how it's going to be, but when I really go through that medical procedure that nobody told me about this or about that, or what it was going to be like afterwards, and everybody's mileage certainly varies, but so the experiential living into the wisdom, the whether we comprehend it or we're told it intellectually, is a whole different part of the process. And I'm really struck by that idea about hope and how you connect those, because I could see how I don't know what the right word is, tempting it would be to go to a hopeless place when my hopes keep hitting a wall, my expectations keep, my dream of what this was going to be like, keeps getting popped, and sooner or later, just feel like giving up.
Yeah, giving up altogether or giving up expectations. And isn't that our nature as humans to pendulum swing, right? To go extreme in one way or another. I'm either going to have all of the expectations and hopes, or I'm just going to say, well, don't expect anything, and then you'll be surprised. But neither of those are really, they're not modalities for healthy living. because real healthy relationships happen in the tension between those places, where we don't abandon expectations and concepts and ideas altogether because they disappoint us. We get disappointed, right, when things don't go the way that we're hoping. But that we do challenge our own expectations, that we do bring those to light, that we make the ones that we're not really aware of, we bring them into our awareness and analyze those, and make sure that when we're feeling times of frustration, that we're not just kind of expulsing things into our family system or at the world or even at our therapist, that we're not just pushing things out, but that we're looking inside and saying, is all of this just happening around me that I'm learning to balance, or is some of this also happening as a result of things that are going on in me? And my husband and I are famous for telling other foster and adoptive parents that, you know, at least in our area, that that the biggest changes that had to happen when our kids came to live with us was in us. That our requirements to change, to rebalance our family systems to meet the needs of our children, they were, like, it's past tense, there are so many things that we've already brought into this that we have to continue to hold ourselves to a standard of working on, because it's not just happening as a result of them and their past and history coming into the family and disrupting things. It's also hitting against things in us that we may be able to shelve or hide or avoid as, you know, adults in a relationship without children who are not as good at hiding and stuffing things down, right? And those have to come back to the surface. We actually have to handle them a lot of times so that we have reasonable expectations, so that we're expecting the right kinds of things and that we're using the right measuring sticks for how things are going.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying here. For me, in my psychology, I'm always idealizing a future change. You know, oh, when we go on vacation, I'm going to read all those books I haven't had a chance to read. So I take 20 books with me and I don't read any of them. Or, you know, somebody new is coming in. We have a new neighbor, a new employee at work, you know, a new puppy. There's always this kind of dream in my mind of how idyllic it's going to be. And right, so that would be something I could work on in myself, and just trying to kind of hang out with my own disappointment or lower those expectations. So tell me, you kind of put it out there a few minutes ago. What are the gaps in the training that you see that real life is exposing in your experience? Do you have a little list?
Well, I do. I have a partial list from some research that I did,
Okay.
actually for my dissertation, and just exploring what adoptive parents experienced during that process before they could finalize and after, and then a lot of anecdotal experience that builds that out as well. One of the ones that was coming up as we were talking about this, I find that oftentimes parents, and maybe parents altogether, you know, I look more at foster and adoptive parents, but that we have this, our expectations for our children's behavior, maybe even, are pretty reasonable. When you go to trainings, they talk to you about the types of behaviors you may see in your home, things that you may not have been aware of, language that you may not use in your home, outbursts and methods of dealing with things that we may not practice or use or accept as part of our regular home life. And they say, get ready, but have expectations. This is normal, and they normalize that, and that is great. So good. But what I find a lot of times is that when that happens, parents are ready and they are balanced in terms of saying it's not wrong that it's happening, but then they may have very unrealistic expectations of what handling that looks like. So what I find a lot of times is it's not, why is my child even doing this? It's, why are they not responding to my interventions? So maybe it's a younger child that may be too old to really throw tantrums, and they're still throwing tantrums, and they're doing all the tools that they've been told so far to do, and none of them are working. And that can become a cycle of hitting an expectation that when I try really hard and have the best intentions, I will see the results I'm expecting. And we can, and we tell our kids this, we tell ourselves this as we're working on our educations and on school and everything. With CAS, that's generally true. If you work really hard on something, you'll reach the expectation that you are planning for. It doesn't work that way with humans.
Yeah.
That's not how it happens. And so sometimes just being able to walk through the whole story part of it and say, not only are the behaviors normal and normalizing that, but saying the non-response or you not seeing movement yet is not an indicator. That's not the measuring stick for how well this is going.
Mm,
The fact that it's happening every day still after weeks,
mm,
maybe even months,
mm,
that's not the measuring stick to say is what you're doing working. The method becomes the thing we measure. And so helping
mm,
parents reroute their mindsets on how do I know if what I'm doing is right and working, because we're culturally ingrained to look for tangible results. And if
mm,
they're not happening, then we begin to feel like a failure. It can push up against perfectionism issues or self-esteem issues or a whole anxiety issues, whole range of things that we may already be working on and dealing with.
mm.
And it
Yeah.
can butt up against that and create something that's a bit different.
Yeah, we tend to think, well, if this isn't working, there's something wrong with them, or there's something wrong with me,
Mhm.
right? Or both of us, or neither of us. Those are the basic four choices, and that can kind of get us into like a spiral. Uh, yeah.
I always encourage parents in this area to, personify the problem, like the tantrums,
Mm,
to try to mentally make it another being so that it separates it from the child, and kind of imagine yourself and picture yourself on the same team with the child on an opposite
yeah,
team from the tantrum.
yeah. So your tantrum really took over there, Billy.
Mhm.
Let you and I see how we could work on not letting this tantrum take over again, something like that.
Mhm.
That was a crude way of doing, but that would be an example of, sometimes we call that externalizing the problem. So
Yep.
it's you and me working together, Billy, against that tendency to have a tantrum when I tell
Mhm.
you it's not time for dinner yet, or
Yep.
that I'm leaving the house. Is it?
Yep.
Give us an example of what you mean.
That's great. Even, and I'll even go, because we've talked a lot about young kids, but maybe I'll give you a teen example, even that, let's say a misuse of an electronic device, or a phone, and it gets taken away. And for
Mm,
some of our kids, management, um, balance and regulation, which balance and regulation for kids all
mm,
around. If you just look at
mm.
straight development, teenagers are not wired to balance or regulate. That's not what their brain's doing. It's not even an expectation. So we have to level those expectations too, that kids cannot on their own regulate their intake of screens and phone use and all that. But let's say there have been boundaries in place, and the kid just keeps flowing through them and keeps flowing through them and keeps flowing through them. It can be so frustrating, especially as a child's getting older, to say, like, why can't you just get this? It's not that hard, right?
Yeah.
Um, but when we do that, like you said, we push people onto the other team. It's you're bad or I'm bad.
Mm,
You're either really bad at this or I'm bad at this, and I'm trying as hard as I am, so it must be you.
mm, mm,
And that tends to be that internal narrative, no matter which side it's on.
mm,
But being able to separate and say this phone issue or this media usage issue or whatever the screen is a separate problem from us. Just developing language to say, you and I want the same things. You want access to your phone more often. I would like you to have access to your phone more often. It cannot happen the way this is happening. There must be things in place. How
yeah.
can I help? Because it's just going to keep getting taken away.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes when we do that, externalizing the problem, instead of saying you're addicted to the games on your phone, you could say the games on your phone are so addictive. Let's see what you and I can do to help you. The phone it keeps calling you to play
Mhm.
it, and sometimes I remember when I was first learning this technique, I had sort of an objection, like, well, what about personal responsibility? It is a way of kind of saying the phone is kind of responsible for you getting addicted to it. And
Mhm.
there's an objection that I have to that, but that the advantage is it removes the shame
Mhm.
that you could put on the kid. Like there's something, why are you so addicted to your phone? Another way
Mhm.
we do it is, and I guess it would work with the tantrum. Your body really wanted to have a tantrum. I know that you're just trying to say that you're mad, and your body just keeps, which neurologically I think is kind of true, right? That our body has, especially if we're talking about trauma, our body has fear reactions that we're not consciously deciding on. If I jump all of a sudden, I didn't consciously decide to jump just then. My body took me over for a second and jumped at that loud noise. Is that making, am I in the ballpark with you?
Oh, 100%. And I would even go a step further with a lot of these to say, because I agree with you too, this personal responsibility, this balance of personal responsibility and accurate information is so
Mm,
important. Because
mm,
when we say the phone's calling you, it is true, it is pulling you towards it. What's interesting is that we aren't stretching or creating something. The technological advances
mm,
and the teams of computer scientists and now teams of combined psychologists and computer scientists who are working together to create the most addictive games possible
yeah.
for the almighty dollar, right? If you look, I've done a little studying just because I'm fascinated by it. If you look at what's happening and the rates of addictive connection, they're watching point by point what people are doing and making sure that people stay connected.
Yeah.
And that level of complication, that is a real thing. And
Yeah.
a teen brain that's not designed, our adults are having issues with this. How in the world are we, going to expect teens to do better than we do? But you're right, our body is going to expel pain in some way or another, and it's going to come out in a way that is effective if we decide how to do that and we learn how or we're guided how, or it's going to be very ineffective and oftentimes damaging to others if we're not guided in that process. And so there's so much truth, and what's beautiful about that is it does feel like, and you see a lot of times parents begin to split because this crux of, I want to teach my children personal responsibility,
Mm,
I do not want them blaming something else,
mm,
becomes, I can't acknowledge truth about any of the rest of it, otherwise we may move in that direction. And we have to learn how to tolerate that tension and ambiguity better, because it can be both true that your body wants to get this out and you are not just actively making decisions, and also there are ways you can control this better. Yes,
mm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
and you're not a prisoner to it. And we empower our kids that way. You're not imprisoned to your cell phone. You are not, it is not governing you. You can submit to it or not. And you do that in a different playing field than just right in the moment when you're, engaging. It's decisions and motivation and value and goals and boundaries and rules that we set up, and all of these things that we as adults use to create a healthy life.
Mm,
And we begin teaching those very early. And also, as parents, sometimes we protect. I am not a fan of putting a smartphone in a kid's hand, just in general, to be honest.
yeah.
It's just not wise. The access to the open access to the internet is probably one of the most damaging things
Mm,
that this generation has encountered. And there are phones and systems now without it. They look like smartphones, function like smartphones. They have zero access to the internet. It's only what they need and not what they don't.
So you
And
can feel
so,
like you're part of your peer group. You've got a phone that looks like everybody else's, but it functions differently.
mhm.
Yeah, I think it would be good for us to think about a whole 20 minutes on addictions, partially because so many of our foster adoptive kinship kids have come from homes where there were addictions. And I would imagine that just becomes a huge red flag for the parents, the adoptive kinship
Mhm.
foster parents, if they see their kid, engaging in some addictive behavior, and just how that must be so scary, uh,
Mhm.
on all sorts of different levels. Let's wind up for today. If you've got one more tip or something, so we can keep these relatively short, and then we'll do another one.
Yeah, I think that the best tip following this is to let your frustration as a parent, your frustration and your issues in the moment when you feel really frustrated, like why am I not seeing what's going on here, to let that be an invitation to take stock of your own expectations. What am I really hoping for here?
Mm,
What am I really hoping to get here? And is that going to happen the way that I'm doing it?
mm,
And so instead of it just being an indication to go and cool off yourself, or, I'll say it, participate in addictive type behavior ourselves,
mm,
zone out on phones, have a drink, something like that to take the edge off, that we stop and we do the emotional work ourselves so that we're modeling that for our kids too.
mm. And what would an example of that be? Can you?
Um, it might look like, let's say with the phone situation, I'm frustrated to no end because I keep saying the same things over and over. And it's like it just falls on deaf ears and the same thing happens over and over again. Instead of walking to the back of the house and closing my door and zoning out on my phone for a while, um, maybe it looks like walking to the back of the house and calling a friend who's maybe a half a generation ahead of me and has raised children already, and say, this is what I'm dealing with. Tell me this is normal. Tell
Mm,
me if this is not normal. And especially, I'll say it's nice to have parents who have biological kids and they say, oh my gosh, we dealt with that all the time. It was like
mm,
they had no brain. And we can balance that against another story and some wisdom rather than running away and escaping from it in our own minds.
yeah. So coming to a support group or reaching out to check in with a friend, sort of normalizing it. I'm not the only person in the world who's struggling with this, and this doesn't mean I should lose my parent certificate that I'm an okay parent.
We'd all need to lose our
Yeah,
certificates if that
right,
was the case.
right.
Yeah.
Anna, thank you so much. Let's close this one down for right now. We'll come back with another one.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.